Welcome to Episode 8. How can I help? Mental illness support. Now, before I get too far, I want to remind the listeners that I am not a psychologist or psychiatrist, and I also speak from my own experiences. And I'm not from textbooks or websites or the whole academic world out there. And finally, this is also not an official publication of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, depression affects about 15% of the population at any one time. Statistics vary, but all this means is that you will likely support someone during your lifetime. And for many of you, that support is likely going to be very significant. Now, I've already mentioned some types of support in the previous episodes, but today I would like to really drill down to what you can do to help someone. I do not enter into this discussion lightly, or having only been involved on the afflicted side of depression. My wife, my grandfather, my mother, and 3 of my children have also dealt with the disease, so I have seen its effects from many perspectives. My wife has suffered since the birth of our second to last daughter with postpartum depression. That never really left her. My children have suffered with the disease throughout their teenage years and through their missionary service. If you listen to the podcast about missionary service and mental illness, you will know that one of my daughters has the illness, but she isn't the only one. Now, there's nothing worse than to watch a spouse or a child suffer through the pains and darkness of depression. My daughter still can't talk about her missionary service. And I did tell her it would likely take some time. It's taken me almost 22 years. My heart hurts for those who suffer, as I have felt the pain, anguish, and distress, both as a son, as a father, as a spouse, and as one who has suffered. I know that there isn't anything a mother or father wouldn't do for a child who is suffering. As far as parents go, and as far as mothers, well, I call it the mother bear effect. Mothers have a fierce loyalty to their children. I believe it's part of the soul and the natural maternal instinct, and it's what mothers were meant to be. I personally believe that this love and loyalty were part of the nature before this life, and that our mother in heaven had a great deal to do with teaching these principles to her daughters. I believe fathers have something similar, but probably not as deep or as instinctual. They do love their children, but they haven't sacrificed as a mother has to bring that soul into this world. I believe that sacrifice bonds them to their children as if they were a part of their own soul. Now, why do I talk about motherly instinct? Because it is most often the mothers who provide for the majority of the care when a child becomes afflicted. And this doesn't mean that when they're young. So I'm going to start with parental support and then move more into a spousal support of depression, spousal support, friendship type support of depression. Now, as a father who has seen 3 of my 8 children pass through the gauntlet of the disease, I fully understand the feeling of helplessness that comes with seeing your child withdraw from those things they once found enjoyable and then begin to question their desires towards gospel principles. Depression is such a difficult disease because there's no way to look at yourself in the mirror and see the changes that have happened to you. Now, I can't look at myself and say, you look depressed or feel depressed today. There's nothing to compare to. Your feelings today represent who you are, and you don't remember what you felt like yesterday. And even if you do, the changes with depression are too subtle. Depression changes reality for you, and often so slowly that you don't even notice that you've gone from happiness to misery in what I would call a relatively short period of time. Now, I know that the changes can be very noticeable to people around you. They'll begin asking questions like, are you okay? And do you feel okay? You seem different. You don't smile as much as you used to. You seem tired all the time. And there are many other questions. Now, the depressed individual really can't see the changes because they're just reacting to their feelings. And feelings is who they are or are who they are. It's like having several bad days that just go on for months at a time. You withdraw socially, mentally, spiritually, simply as a natural reaction to what you feel. You don't have a desire to do anything, much less something that requires effort, and also masking your emotions at the same time. Now remember that masking is the way depressed individuals mask their true feelings for a period of time, mirroring on their exterior what a normal person would do and say. As far as social encounters, you avoid what you can and mask through what you can't. Now, you might think that if a person is masking, then they should know that something's different. Yes and no. We all put on a mask when we go out in public. We know there are some things that are acceptable within the culture and social circles, and things that are not, and we adapt our behavior to those social rules. Masking is similar in some ways. The afflicted mask to avoid looking out of place and to feel accepted. They mask so they don't have to answer questions about their mood or lack of desire to conform to typical social expectations. Most cultures, and especially in the Church of Jesus Christ, there is an expectation that you are happy and content, or that if you aren't, it's temporary. Everyone wants to fix you if you aren't happy. I understand the intent. We are, after all, to look out for each other. But for someone who is depressed, the attempts at fixing the unhappiness only reminds them that their unhappiness isn't going to be fixed by going to church more, reading and studying harder, or serving others more often. The well-intended help becomes more of a burden than a help, and they often sink further into depression and retreat further from life. Now, mentally ill individuals do not always mask. Once we are in our home or places where we have trusting relationships with others, the mask often comes off. And then those whom we trust the most catch the brunt of the internal chaos roaming our souls. I know that this seems counterintuitive, that we would almost, in a sense, punish those we love the most with our true selves. But the truth is that if someone who is depressed lets down their guard or unmasks around you, then they trust you. This is a good indication that you can help. So does a person know that they are depressed? It's complicated, yes and no. They know that they don't feel well, are exhausted, their mind is foggy, and sometimes they are in pain, often in strange places. But they may not associate it with depression. It can be hard to accept the idea that you have a disease that defines and changes your whole personality and reality. All of us by nature like to feel we are in control of our minds and bodies, and to think that a disease controls parts of the mind and body without our consent is very disconcerting. So accepting depression is a difficult task, and it is far more difficult for men than women, for the most part. I would say that it is our egos, but it may be even more complex than that. We certainly don't like appearing weak or helpless, and much less by a disease that affects more than the body. It affects the mind. A broken leg's a good war story for men. Mental illness just sounds like an excuse for someone who isn't trying. What I'm saying is that convincing a man he needs help may be a little more difficult than the opposite sex. However, I found this is not always the case, but just a general guideline. So what is a parent to do when they see the signs of depression and even anxiety in their child? Our first inclination as parents is to fix the problem. Their suffering causes us suffering. So we have a tendency to want to fix the issue, and quickly. We reach into the back of our brains and try to use techniques we've used in the past to get through tough times and difficult emotions. Now, if the parent has never experienced depression in a real sense, the tendency is to use techniques more suited to brief interludes of sadness or distress, such as the passing of a loved one, heartbreak when a relationship fails, and other types of failures in life. It is what we know and understand, so it is what we use. We have had success with the techniques and expect that our children will do the same. I don't believe that this is a bad thing for a parent to do this in the sense of intent. It comes out of love, in that you are trying to help a child to overcome difficult emotions. I believe the parent's intent is pure, and the techniques are the experiences that they know. I never fault parents for trying, nor should they beat themselves up about what they might have done wrong with their child. It is much better to move forward and acknowledge you did the best you could with the knowledge you had. However, what you've probably found is that those techniques were built for a different kind of temporary depressed mood, rather than wholesale clinical depression. Now, true clinical depression may have a trigger event, such as a relationship breakup, death, or any kind of real life failure, but the result is never very temporary. So if you suspect that a child, adult, or teenager has clinical depression, then you must approach it as such. Techniques built to help temporary grief do not do much for clinical depression, as they will be frustratingly lacking. The child, even an adult child, may not understand what is happening to them as they cannot self-reflect. Depression deprives the person of self-reflection and even hides previous emotional states. So the first thing any parent can do is research the signs of depression and the effects. Now, I'm not going to go through all of those. They're found on various websites, and they're all pretty similar. National Institute of Mental Health, WebMD, you name it, there's several of them. The next step, though, after that, after researching these effects, is to have a discussion. And it may be several discussions about what the child or individual is feeling. The purpose is to help them understand three things. 1, what they are feeling isn't normal. 2, it is not their fault. And 3, they need some help. Now, Elder Holland mentions this idea in his talk, Like a Broken Vessel. A good read when you have a moment. These conversations might be quick, but they also may take years. It will depend upon several factors, including your current relationship with the child, length of the illness, severity of the illness, what the child knows about the disease, and the level of acceptance of mental illness as a true disease. Even then, many children of teenage and adult years may not accept the idea that they have depression. Now, it seems ludicrous to those who can see the changes that depressed individuals cannot see the same changes. But to them, it is their life, and they see the changes as reactions to who they are. Their feelings are who they are, and what you are telling them is that what they feel, and in some sense, who they are, is not real, but an illness. It can be a tough sell in many respects. So you begin with the easy questions. How do you feel? Have you noticed changes and desire to do things, and so forth? Once the child comes to a better understanding that what they feel is not normal, nor their fault, then it is time to involve those who can help. I have found that it is only when they have received help from those types of individuals who are professionals that they can come to a realization of how far the illness has really taken them. I know that help comes in many forms, and seeing a counselor in our society still has a deep stigma attached to it. But it is often wise to begin with counseling or some type of help where the individual can talk. I know there's a great deal of debate also about medications and how well they work or not. I'm not going to get into that debate, but I have, and my family has seen great success with them. So have my children and my wife. But I do not say that medication is the answer for everyone. There also exists a stigma about mental illness medications in our society. A crutch for feelings, weak, never get better unless you figure this out, and so forth, generally coming from individuals who have never really felt depression. The answers to getting on the road to healing vary significantly, and you're going to have to decide with the child what makes sense. Some things I would say are important. Make sure the counselor's morality and general philosophy aligns with the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ. This can be difficult, but the Church does have resources that can help you find a counselor. Second, keep your mind open to the options of treatment, including medication and other treatment options. Third, call on the powers of heaven to guide you where you need to go and listen without bias. As a parent, you will need to be loving, patient, and understanding towards the child. Listen, don't judge when they talk. Don't try to solve the problem by telling them what to do or how to feel. Ask them what they think they can do. You may hear things that will shock you, and you need to avoid the tendency to react strongly to those things. They may tell you things about suicide, drugs, intimate relationships, and a host of other things outside the gospel that they have tried in a form of self-medication. A strong negative reaction may close them off to you, and for a long time. The past is the past, and you aren't trying to change that. You are trying to help them change the future. So ask questions and listen. In the end, with your help, they're going to see that they have a disease and that they need some help. Now, I've spoken more in general about how to help your child with understanding the disease and getting them help. From a gospel perspective, there are some important things to understand. The child may be having great difficulty with the gospel. When you have difficulty feeling the Spirit and don't have a great desire to interact socially, and going to church really doesn't feel as it should, then you are going to say things like, I don't want to go to church. I don't know if I even believe in God. I don't know if the Book of Mormon is true. I'm not sure that I want to serve a mission. And you can imagine the remaining responses, and maybe you even heard some. What is important about these statements is that each of the statements is more likely a symptom of the disease rather than an actual statement about their testimony. They do retain the testimony they had, but the depression covers it like a thick blanket. They can't remove the blanket, so eventually they will say things such as, I'm not sure that I believe in God. What this means is that they can't lift the blanket of the disease, not that a testimony isn't under it. In order to help them regain their testimony, the disease covering it needs to be treated, and then slowly the blanket will lift, and they will pick up the pieces of their testimony and put them back together. Now, I make this sound like my child will be fine next week if I can get him some help, and that is unlikely to be the case. It is going to take time. It may even take a few years. This doesn't mean that they won't show improvement during those years. It is likely to take years to get the disease fully under control. And control is a bit of a loose term. Understand, though, if you rush them back into church attendance, seminary, institute, ministering, and so forth, it may not help, and it even may drive them further from the church. Depression causes negative associations to attach themselves to things we generally associate as good and helpful, such as attending church, attending activities, scripture reading, prayer, temple attendance, and so many others. I still have anxiety about church and have been working through the healing process for 15 years. So understand that these associations may run very deep. However, I have come to love attending church, although I still have great anxieties in social situations where I don't know anyone. Yes, you do want them back to doing the things they need to, but you might have to take it slow, having them simply go to church and stay for as long as they can. If it needs to be in the foyer, then it needs to be. Make sure that a few people do say hi, but I wouldn't overwhelm them. They're going to have to reassociate all of the good things with positive experiences, and that will take time. Scripture reading and prayer can be similar. Just sitting with the family in family prayer might be sufficient. Having them read what they can is also something that can be done. However, be cautious with anything you do and make sure that the Lord is in it. Remember that as much as you love the child, he does too, and he has allowed the disease to happen. Sometimes the Lord needs time to work his miracles. Do not try to do his work. Meaning, you can't heal the disease, but he can. You can certainly make a mess of things if you try to force a healing upon the child. If the individual needs time, make sure that they are invited to family prayer and scripture study, but they don't have to participate unless they really desire to. If they go to church, leaders should be advised about what is happening. Often, well-meaning leaders will want to get the individual involved with a calling or other assignments. You will need to communicate closely with the leader and the individual to make sure that when they are ready to make sure that they let you know when they are ready. What I am saying in all of this is that while you can be very anxious to have the child to return to full activity, you will need to take it at the pace the child can handle. This also doesn't mean that you become a helicopter parent attending to every need of the child. They need a normal relationship where they are trusted to do things and to participate, but are free and willing to talk to you. They will still need house rules, church guidance, punishment if necessary if they are younger, and so forth. I suppose that some of those things change when they are adults, but don't make the child a fragile porcelain doll. Now, the same is true for adults and even older children. So now you say, I'm not sure how to do this. Good. Now you're ready to start learning. If you believe you don't know how, you might just be humble enough for the Lord to teach you how. Neither do those of us who have dealt with the disease. Everyone is different, and you will need to get the Lord very involved, and stay close to him. And remember, you do not have to be perfect. Just be a loving parent who listens and understands and does their best to encourage. You'll just be fine. Now I'm going to move into concerns with a spouse or a close friend. What do you do when your spouse suddenly, or not so suddenly, starts to show signs of depression? Now, for this, I will use my own wife, and yes, she has agreed to let me use this example. After the birth of our second to last child, my wife began experiencing symptoms of depression. Now, I had been on the healing path for a few years, but not terribly many. But I could tell something was different, and I did suspect postpartum depression. My wife, for all the years she took care of me, had never experienced it. And even though she had seen it since we were first married, she couldn't identify it in herself. Again, this is very important. Self-identification of depression is rare. And most often, someone needs another close person to identify the changes. I spent a few weeks asking if she were okay, and she said yes, but it wasn't the yes I was accustomed to. I could tell that she was not well. I approached the subject with the idea that I had experienced depression and that she might be experiencing symptoms. Now, from my recollection, she resisted for a short time, but eventually she consented to see a doctor. And I believe I had to make the appointment and make sure she went. Just as a side note, in today's world, many women are screened for postpartum depression, but it wasn't so at that point in time. The review with the doctor showed that she had almost a textbook case of postpartum depression. She was given a medication, and within a couple of days, I remember her saying something to the effect that she had no idea how bad off she was. I want to reiterate this one more time. People who have depression do not realize how far they have drifted from a normal emotional state. So what do you do if you have a spouse, a very good friend, anyone with whom you share a close relationship and you suspect they have depression? Really not much different from what we talked about with a child, except for the relationship is going to be different. They still need to understand the three things. 1, that what they are feeling isn't normal. 2, it is not their fault. And 3, they need help. How you go about that may depend upon your relationship. With my wife, she trusted that I understood depression, that her symptoms might be caused by depression. But I still had to start with, how are you feeling? Her normal answer was, I don't know. But her body language was very different. I could tell she wasn't feeling the same as usual. The way you do with anyone with whom you have a close relationship. Their body language changes and becomes more withdrawn and unhappy. She didn't really want to do anything except, in her words, cry. What I'm trying to say is that you might have to help them understand what they are feeling. They may not even have words for it. The mind becomes foggy when you are depressed, and thoughts can't be expressed like they normally would. You may have to pull out a sheet of symptoms from one of the many medical websites and run down a list of questions. Again, the National Institute of Health, Mayo Clinic, WebMD, and various others have pretty much the same list. If they say yes to several of the questions, I would show them what you have. What you are trying to accomplish is to help them see that they need to get some help, and that they are not just going to be able to fix the problem on their own. Then you're going to have to hold their hand through the process of getting help. And then that won't even be the end of it. You will then need to take them on task during the treatment. You need to keep them on task during treatment. Will it be difficult? Yeah, it's going to be difficult. Will it be time-consuming? Yes. Will it cause some adjustments in your routine? Absolutely. Now, will it be worth it? Every minute. Some final thoughts on this particular subject. Mental illness is a tough disease. While all of us can do our best to help our friends and family, there are going to be times when even the best methods don't work. That is not to say we won't reach most people. We will, and in almost every case, depression can be treated. However, you can't force someone to listen, and you can't force them to do the things needed to get help. Yes, there are drastic steps that can be taken, such as mental institutions and hospitalizations, but my experience still tells me there has to be some amount of willpower on the part of the afflicted person. In other words, you can't force someone to get better no matter how much you love them or desire to help. We shouldn't give up, but understand that your willpower, love, and desire alone is not going to be sufficient to heal them. So if you are doing your best and trying to help in the ways you know how, and they decide to do something drastic, do not blame yourself. It is not going to help anyone for you to fall apart, especially the afflicted person. You are the stability they need, even when they make bad decisions. Love them, help them, have patience, do your best, and then leave the rest to the Lord. Now, second, I may have inadvertently made the conversations with the afflicted person sound easy and straightforward. That was not intended. These conversations can be difficult, frustrating, and at times overwhelming. It will take patience, love, and a great deal of understanding. We have a natural tendency to feel empathy as the afflicted do. Their pain becomes our pain, their suffering our suffering. Don't let empathy become a roadblock to getting effective treatment. We want to be loving, patient, kind, and end the suffering for both of us, but that can lead to allowing rules to be broken, isolation of the afflicted, and other concerns. We don't want to add more suffering and pain to the afflicted. They're going to have to still do things, difficult things. To just let them withdraw from everything and live in their dark room is not the answer or the solution for anyone. They are going to need some strong encouragement at times. This means that you are likely going to have to be perky, happy, and energetic to get them moving and continue to function. You will be able to tell when it's too much for them and then when you push a little, especially if they're close to you. There will be days that all they can do is get out of bed and do just a little something they used to love. They will avoid things they used to love to do to avoid associating negative feelings with those activities. But it is also those activities that will help them. In any case, just be aware that helping them is not letting them do whatever they want. Third, treatment is a long road. It is not going to be a smooth one. There will be ups and downs. Depression can be and is often cyclical. And there are going to be bad days, even when you're under treatment. Understand that 1 or 2 bad days doesn't mean that they are falling back into a reclusive depression. As stress varies, so will their disease. Part of the treatment will be to learn to better deal with stress. Treatment is mostly about the long term and elevating the overall functioning of the person, and that the good days really start to outnumber the bad. It is also trying to avoid the deep depressions. Treatment may not bring a person back to completely normal, but it can come very close. Many individuals function quite well as they manage their disease, so there is great hope. If you're just starting the process, it may take some time to find the right balance of various treatments, and that time may even be a few years. It took me about 3 to 4 years before I began to feel even reasonable. Understand that depression, now this is the fourth thing, understand that depression takes a great toll on church service, testimony, the spirit, and several other spiritual factors. Just like the disease, there are going to be good days and bad days. Not only should you know this, but so should the afflicted person. To understand that bad days might happen without reason, but they will pass into better days is hope, and hope is sometimes all we have. Do not fret the bad days. Take care of the afflicted and manage the disease, and the good days will return. Finally, for the person who is caring for the afflicted, the burden is real, and it can be very difficult for one person. You will need an army if you can find one, but at least having 2 or 3 people who can provide compassionate service and who the afflicted person trusts will provide needed rest to those who are providing the caring service. You are going to need to get away at times, and the afflicted will need someone to help them when you are not there. There are also other considerations such as work, school, life balance, schedules that will need to be met, especially if the afflicted is a spouse. What I am saying is that if you don't take care of yourself, you are not going to be of any value to the afflicted. So learn to manage the disease from the other side of things, from providing the service. Now, as always, remember the Lord requires the fight, and then he can do his part. Next week, we'll be discussing spiritual concerns and what can be done to help on the spiritual side of things when you suffer with depression or bipolar concerns. Until next time.